Before we talk about what to eat, or how to move, or how to live, I want to talk about what we actually are. Because I think that's where most health conversations go wrong. They start in the middle. They start with the protocol, the diet, the supplement stack, the exercise program, and they skip the most important question, which is what kind of animal is a human being? And what does that animal actually need to thrive? Once you understand that, really understand it, not just intellectually, but in your gut, everything else follows naturally. The food choices make sense, the movement makes sense, the sleep, the time outside, the connection to wild systems. All of it makes sense. You stop following rules and start following logic. And that's what this episode is about. The foundation. The why underneath all the what. My name's David, and this is Undomesticated. Let's start with some numbers, because I think they're really important for framing everything that follows. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been on this planet for somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years, depending on which fossil evidence you're looking at. Our genus, Homo, goes back about 2.5 million years. And if you zoom out even further to include our pre-human ancestors, the hominids that we evolved from, we're talking about a lineage that stretches back 6 or 7 million years. Agriculture, the growing of crops and the domestication of animals that fundamentally changed how humans eat and live, is about 10,000 years old. In some parts of the world, less. The industrial food system that most people in the developed world eat from now, processed foods, refined seed oils, high fructose corn syrup, food-like substances that bear almost no resemblance to anything that existed in nature before about 1900. That's maybe 100 years old? In its current extreme form, maybe 50? So here's what that means in practical terms. If you compressed all of human evolutionary history into a single calendar year, if January 1st was when our genus first appeared, agriculture would show up on December 31st at about 11:45 p.m. The industrial food system would show up in the last few seconds before midnight. We are ancient animals. Our genetics, physiology, our biochemistry, all of it was shaped by millions of years of living in a completely different environment than the one that we've built around ourselves in the last eye blink of evolutionary time. And here's the thing about evolution. It's slow. Glacially slow. Our bodies have not meaningfully adapted to the modern food environment. We're still running the same biological hardware we were running 50,000 years ago. The same digestive system, the same hormonal responses, the same metabolic machinery. All of it designed for a world that no longer exists. That mismatch between what our bodies were designed for and what we're actually asking them to do is the root cause of most chronic disease in the modern world. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune conditions, depression, anxiety, chronic pain. These are not random misfortunes. They are predictable outcomes of asking an ancient animal to live in the way it was never designed for. This is the foundational insight of ancestral health. And once you really internalize it, you can't unknow it. So what is ancestral health? Because I want to be really clear about this, because there's a lot of confusion and a lot of dogma that gets attached to this term. Ancestral health is not a diet. It's not paleo or carnivore or keto or any specific eating protocol. Those things may be tools within an ancestral health framework, but they're not the thing itself. Ancestral health is a lens. It's a way of asking questions about human biology and human behavior by looking at the conditions under which we evolved. It asks, what did humans eat for the vast majority of our existence? How did we move? How did we sleep? What was our relationship with light and darkness, with community, with the natural world? And then it asks, how far have we departed from those conditions? And what are the consequences of that departure? That's it. That's the whole framework. It's actually quite simple, even though the implications are vast. Now, within that framework, there are a lot of different voices and a lot of different emphases, and frankly, a lot of disagreement about specifics. The paleo community has its perspective, the carnivore community has its perspective, the traditional foods movement, the Weston A. Price Foundation, the evolutionary medicine researchers, they all have their angles and they often don't agree. And that's fine, because the specifics are always going to be debated. What's not debatable is the core framework that human beings are biological organisms shaped by evolutionary pressures, and that our modern environment represents a radical departure from the conditions that shaped us, and that this departure has consequences for our health. One person I want to give credit to here is Boyd Eaton, a physician and anthropologist who in 1985 published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine called Paleolithic Nutrition. That paper is really the intellectual foundation of the modern ancestral health movement. Eaton and his colleagues argued that the dietary pressures of pre-agricultural humans represent a kind of baseline against which we can evaluate modern dietary practices. It was a genuinely radical idea at the time, and the research that followed in the decades that passed largely supported the core thesis. I also want to mention Weston A. Price, a dentist who in the 1930s traveled the world studying traditional cultures that had not yet been touched by industrialized food. What he found was remarkable. Culture after culture of people eating very different diets, but sharing extraordinary health, physical development, and freedom from the chronic diseases that were already beginning to plague the industrialized world. His work, published in Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, is one of the most important documents in the history of ancestral nutrition, and I would put it on the reading list of anyone who wants to understand this space deeply. So, if ancestral health is a lens rather than a specific diet, what are the actual pillars? The domains of human life where the mismatch between our ancient biology and our modern environment is most consequential. I want to walk through these one by one, because I think most people who are familiar with ancestral health know the food piece, but don't fully appreciate how much broader the picture is. Let's start with food, because it's where most people begin, and because it's genuinely the most impactful lever most people can pull. What did humans actually eat for the vast majority of our existence? This is where the debates happen, and I want to be honest about the complexity. The honest answer is it varied enormously by geography, season, and culture. There is no single ancestral human diet. The Inuit ate almost entirely animal foods. Tropical populations ate large amounts of fruit and plant material. Most populations ate somewhere in between. But there are some things that are consistent across virtually all pre-agricultural human diets. Whole, unprocessed foods, animal foods of some kinds, meat, fish, eggs, organs, insects, wild plants, roots, tubers, leaves, fruits, nuts, and seeds, fermented foods in many cultures, and a complete absence of refined grains, refined sugars, industrial seed oils, and the thousands of food-like substances that make up the modern processed food supply. That last point is really important. The argument isn't necessarily that everyone needs to eat a specific ratio of macronutrients or avoid every grain. The argument is that the radical processing and industrialization of our food supply has created a nutritional environment that our bodies are completely unprepared for. Hyperpalatable, calorie-dense, nutrient-poor, chemically complex food that hijacks our biological reward systems in ways that real food never could. The epidemiological evidence here is pretty damning. Populations that transition from traditional whole food diets to industrialized processed food diets show rapid and dramatic increases in obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic conditions. This has been documented in indigenous populations around the world, in populations that urbanized rapidly, and most strikingly in the Pima people of the American Southwest, who were divided by the border. The Pima people on the Mexican side live fairly traditional lives, but have drastically different health outcomes than the Pima people on the US side. And it's based entirely on diet and lifestyle. The second pillar is movement. And this is one that I think gets less attention than food in mainstream health conversations. Our bodies were designed to move. Not in the sense of going to the gym 3 times a week and then sitting in a chair for the other 23 hours of the day, but in a sense of consistent, varied, low level movements throughout every day, punctuated by intense physical effort. Hunter gatherer populations typically walk 5 to 15 miles a day. They squat, they climb, they carry, they lift, they crawl. They move through the full range of movement that human joints are capable of. And they do this not as exercise, not as a separate activity carved out from the rest of life, but as a natural consequence of how they live. The modern sedentary lifestyle, sitting at a desk, sitting in a car, sitting on a couch, is genuinely novel in human evolutionary history, and the consequences are profound. Chronic pain, postural dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, depression, all of these have strong connections to physical inactivity and sedentary behavior. Katie Bowman, who I would love to have as a guest on this show sometime, has done extraordinary work on what she calls nutritious movement. The idea that the body needs varied movement inputs, the way that it needs varied nutritional inputs, and that the modern movement environment is impoverished as the modern food environment. Natural movement practitioners like Erwan Lacour of MoveNat have also done important work here. The idea that human movement should be functional, varied, and connected to the natural environment rather than performed on machines in a climate-controlled room. I want to be honest about my own history here, too. When I was living on the land, movement was just life. I wasn't exercising. I was moving livestock and foraging and building stuff and carrying and squatting and lifting as a natural consequence of the work I was doing. My body felt extraordinary. Moving to a city and adopting a sedentary lifestyle was one of the single most damaging things that I did to my health. And it's one of the things I'm most actively working to reclaim. Sleep and circadian rhythm is the pillar that I think gets the least attention and may be the most underrated in terms of health impact. Humans evolved in a world governed by light and darkness. We woke with the sun, we wound down as darkness fell. We slept in sync with natural light cycles, and our entire hormonal and metabolic system is organized around those rhythms. The invention of artificial light, and particularly the blue light emitted by screens, has fundamentally disrupted those rhythms for most people in the modern world. We stay up hours past natural darkness, flooding our eyes with light that signals our brains that it's still daytime, suppressing melatonin, disrupting cortisol rhythms, impairing sleep quality, and cascading into hormonal and metabolic dysfunction that affects virtually every system in the body. The research on sleep deprivation and metabolic health is stark. Even a few nights of poor sleep significantly impairs insulin sensitivity, increases appetite, disrupts hunger hormones, and promotes fat storage. For someone managing diabetes or metabolic disease, sleep is not optional. It's medicine. circadian rhythm alignment, getting morning light in your eyes early in the day, reducing artificial light exposure in the evening, sleeping in true darkness is one of the highest leverage things most people can do for their health, and it costs nothing. Time in nature may seem soft compared to diet and sleep, but the research is actually quite robust for this pillar. Humans evolved in nature. We are nature. We spent virtually our entire evolutionary history outdoors, embedded in natural systems, surrounded by other species, exposed to natural light and weather and the microbiome of soil, plants, and animals. The modern indoor life, particularly the urban indoor life, represents a radical departure from that, and the consequences show up in ways that might surprise you. Exposure to natural environments has been shown to reduce cortisol, lower blood pressure, improve immune function, reduce inflammation, improve mood and cognitive function, and reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. In Japan, there's a formalized practice called forest bathing that is actually prescribed by physicians as a health intervention. The microbiome piece is particularly interesting. Our gut microbiome, which plays a crucial role in immune function, mental health, and metabolic health, evolved in relationship with the microbial diversity of natural environments. Soil microbes, plant microbes, the microbes of wild animals and wild foods. The largely sterile urban environment is genuinely impoverished in terms of microbial diversity. And that impoverishment has consequences. Kids who grow up on farms have dramatically lower rates of allergies and autoimmune conditions than kids who grow up in cities. The hygiene hypothesis, the idea that our immune systems need microbial challenge to develop properly, is one of the better supported ideas in modern immunology. The last pillar I want to touch on is one that rarely gets included in ancestral health conversations, and I think that's a mistake. Humans are deeply social animals. We evolved in small bands of 50 to 150 people who knew each other intimately, depended on each other for survival, and lived with a clear sense of purpose and role within the group. Loneliness and social isolation were genuinely dangerous in the ancestral environment. A human alone was a human at risk. The modern epidemic of loneliness is real, and its health consequences are severe. Social isolation has been shown to have health impacts comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The absence of community, the meaningful work, the sense of purpose within something larger than yourself, those are not soft lifestyle issues. They are biological needs that are going unmet for enormous numbers of people. I say this as someone who built deep community around a shared purpose and then lost it. The grief of that loss was real and it affected my health in ways I didn't fully appreciate at the time. Rebuilding community and purpose is as much a part of my return to health as fixing my diet. So, we've talked about ancestral health as a framework. Now, I want to talk about human rewilding because I think it's related, but it's a distinct concept that deserves its own space. Rewilding as an ecological concept refers to the restoration of wild processes to landscapes, reintroducing apex predators, restoring natural hydrology, allowing ecosystems to self organize rather than managing them into a kind of agricultural tidiness. The wilding of Yellowstone with wolves is probably the most famous example. The cascading effects of that reintroduction on the entire ecosystem were extraordinary and largely unexpected. Human rewilding takes the same concept and applies it to people. It asks, what are the wild processes that human beings need? And how do we restore them in a world that has systematically removed them? And I want to be clear that human rewilding is not about going back. It's not about abandoning modernity or moving to the woods and pretending it's 10,000 years ago. and none of this agricultural stuff ever happened. We can't do that. The past is gone. That world no longer exists. It's about consciously reconnecting with the conditions and inputs that human beings need physically, psychically, spiritually, while living in the actual world as it exists now. But moving forward, not moving backwards. It's about understanding that you're a wild animal, that your body and mind have wild requirements, and that meeting those requirements is not optional if you want to be well. For me personally, rewilding is always centered on a few key practices: wild food, foraging, understanding the edible landscape, eating things that grew without human intervention. This is not just about nutrition, although the nutritional profile of wild foods is extraordinary compared to cultivated equivalents. It's about relationship. When you forage your own food, you develop an intimate relationship with the land you live on. You start to see it differently. You become a participant in the ecosystem rather than just a consumer of it. Natural movement in wild environments, moving through varied terrain, climbing, carrying, balancing, it engages the body in ways that no gym can replicate. The unpredictability of natural environments itself is a kind of training stimulus. Primitive skills, fire making, shelter building, tracking, plant identification, these reconnect us with the competencies that humans carried for hundreds of thousands of years and that have been almost entirely outsourced in the modern world. There's something that happens physiologically when you make fire with your hands or build shelter from materials you found on the land. Something settles and something wakes up. Time in genuinely wild places. Not parks, not managed landscapes, but places where wild processes are operating. And you're a visitor rather than a manager. And most importantly, relationship with the wild food system. Understanding where food comes from, what it takes for it to be there, what the land requires to be healthy and productive. And this is something that permaculture addresses deeply, and why I think permaculture and rewilding are natural companions. We don't have highly forageable environments in most of the world anymore. Biodiversity has declined and we've just clear cut everything. But if we can take those now food deserts and replant them in ways that mimic biological systems, natural wild biological systems, and create those highly forageable environments, you will have infinitely more productivity than having that land as a cow pasture. I want to zoom out for a minute and talk about why I think this conversation is more urgent now than it ever has been. We are in the middle of a chronic disease catastrophe. The numbers are genuinely staggering. In the United States right now, roughly 74% of adults are overweight or obese. More than 37 million people have diabetes. Another 96 million have prediabetes. That's more than 1 in 3 American adults. Heart disease is a leading cause of death. Autoimmune conditions are skyrocketing. Mental health conditions are at epidemic levels. These are not genetic problems. The human genome has not changed meaningfully in the time it has taken these conditions to explode. These are environmental problems. They are the predictable consequence of asking an ancient biological organism to live in a radically novel environment. And the conventional medical response, while it saves lives in acute situations and should be valued for that, is largely inadequate for chronic disease. We're very good at managing symptoms. We're not very good at addressing root causes. Medications can manage those short-term symptoms and make us feel better and help us live a little longer, but they don't address why these things are dysregulated in the first place. Ancestral approaches do. I also want to name something that I think is important and doesn't get said enough in this space. It's not just a personal health issue. The industrialized food system that is making people sick is also destroying the ecological systems that all life depends on. Industrial agriculture is one of the leading drivers of soil degradation, water pollution, biodiversity loss, and greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. The ancestral and rewilding approach to food, whole foods, regeneratively produced, locally sourced, and wild where possible, is not just better for individual health, it's better for the planet. These things are not separate issues. The health of human beings and the health of ecosystems are deeply intertwined. You cannot have healthy people on a sick planet, and you cannot have a healthy planet while feeding people in the way we currently do. That connection between human health and ecological health is one of the things I most want to explore on this show. It's where ancestral health and rewilding and permaculture all converge. And I think it's where the most important conversations are happening. Okay, so I want to bring this back to Earth because I'm very aware that everything I've just said can feel overwhelming or abstract or like it requires a dramatic lifestyle overhaul, and most people simply can't execute that. I can't. Not right now. So let me be very clear about something. You do not need to move to the woods. You do not need to forage all your own food. You do not need to quit your job and buy some land and start a homestead somewhere. You don't need to do any of that to benefit enormously from an ancestral approach to your health. What you need is to understand the framework and start making better decisions within the constraints of your actual life. And this is genuinely my area of passion and expertise. Because right now I'm living in a city, in an apartment with limited resources, with a partner who has said, I don't want to eat just grass and innards, which is fair. I can't go back to living in a teepee. She would kill me. I cannot forage my breakfast every morning. I have to navigate real world constraints. And here's what I know from years of coaching people in similar situations. You can move the needle dramatically without doing it perfectly. Cut the industrial processed food. That's the single highest leverage thing most people can do, and it doesn't require a ton of extra money. It doesn't require land access. It doesn't require your family to be 100% on board with your crazy new lifestyle. Just stop eating things that come in packages with ingredient lists you can't pronounce. That alone will produce meaningful changes in how you feel within weeks. Prioritize animal foods and whole plants. Eggs are cheap and extraordinarily nutritious. Canned sardines and mackerel are cheap and loaded with omega-3s. Organ meats, liver especially, are among the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet and are extremely inexpensive. If you think you don't like organ meats, find yourself like a ground beef blend that has some organ mixed in, which is also pretty readily available these days. Seasonal vegetables are affordable at most grocery stores. You can eat extraordinarily well on a modest budget if you know what to prioritize. You can move more throughout the day. You don't need a gym. Walk, squat, get on the floor, get back up, carry things, crawl. Move your body through its full range of motion every day. That costs absolutely nothing. Get outside every morning. Even 5 minutes of natural light in your eyes within an hour of waking has measurable effects on your circadian rhythm and hormonal health. Even in a city. Even in winter. And morning is better because vitamin D is produced on your skin. It needs time to absorb. So if you go out in the afternoon and sunbathe and then immediately jump in the shower and scrub it all off, you're not getting anything from it. So morning is better. Start learning your local wild food landscape. Most cities have far more edible plants than people realize. Dandelions, wood sorrel, mulberries, pawpaws, depending on your region. When I was in Florida, every other bush in the Publix parking lot was a Yopon holly, which is a native North American source of caffeine. These are not dramatic interventions. They're small shifts in the direction of what your body actually needs. And they compound over time in ways that are genuinely profound. I want to close by saying something that I think is important. This framework, ancestral health, human rewilding, primal living, whatever you want to call it, it's not a religion, it's not a dogma. It's a set of questions grounded in evolutionary biology and anthropology that I think lead us towards better answers about how to live as human beings. The specifics are always going to be debated, and I think that debate is healthy and productive. I'm going to have guests on the show who disagree fundamentally with each other about important things, and that's intentional. I want this to be a place where ideas are tested and examined rather than just preached. What I'm not willing to really debate is the core premise, though, that we are ancient animals, that our modern environment represents a radical departure from the conditions that shaped us, and that closing that gap even partially, even imperfectly, within the constraints of real modern life makes us healthier and more alive. Those, to me, are all facts, not just some theory. That's what the show is about. And I'm doing it in real time from the inside of a pretty significant health crisis, with all the constraints and complications that real life brings. This is Undomesticated. I'm David Atlas. Thank you for listening. If you want to find out more, please subscribe. Please like the show, rate it. We're available on pretty much all podcast platforms. Rating would be amazing. And we now have a website. It's podpage.com/undomesticated. Go take a look at it. You can subscribe there to our newsletter and get more updates when we're doing some cool things. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.